So we'll be looking at the cardiovascular system today, finishing up what we started talking about yesterday when we were going over the respiratory system. And we're going to be talking about how we actually deliver that most important nutrient, oxygen, throughout the body, but also how we deliver all the other nutrients, proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins, minerals. And then obviously your blood has like a lot of water in it, and that's a part of your cardiovascular system. So we're delivering that one as well. So we're going to be talking about the pieces that make up our cardiovascular system. So we'll be getting into a little bit about that anatomy, how the cardiovascular system overall functions. We will talk a little bit about how electrical excitation happens. That's one of my favorite parts, actually. You know, your heart is exceptionally good at generating electrochemical signals. And so we need to, you know, your entire body runs on electrochemical signals, but your heart's very, very, very good at it. So we'll talk about how your heart's actually doing that and spreading that signal around to make sure that it all contracts simultaneously and generates pressure. And then we will also talk a little bit about the factors that make up cardiac output, because that's the overall performance of our heart. And if we are going to be experts on how to train the heart, we have to understand sort of how the heart functions. And then we will talk a little bit about Vo2 Max at the very end and why that is so important. And then we will talk a little bit about blood vessels as well. I do want to kind of finish things up from yesterday. I want to start us off and finish up that video that we watched yesterday with the circulatory system. So I'm gonna, hold on. Let's go ahead and take our way through this real quick. Oh no, there we go. All right, I'll take it back just a little bit so we have some context for whatever it is.
We're used to talking about heart, back to your lungs. And maybe you're thinking, well, what about the heart? Isn't the heart the whole point of the circulatory system? Well, settle down. I'm going to explain. We're used to talking about the heart as the head honcho of the circulatory system, and yeah, you would be in serious trouble if you didn't have a heart. But the heart's job is to basically power the circulatory system, move the blood all around your body, and get it back to the lungs so that it can pick up more oxygen and get rid of the CO2. As a result, the circulatory system of mammals essentially makes a figure eight. Oxygenated blood is pumped from the heart to the rest of the body, and then when it makes its way back to the heart again, it's then pumped on a shorter circuit to the lungs to pick up more oxygen and unload CO2 before it goes back to the heart and starts the whole cycle over again. So even though the heart does all the heavy lifting in the circulatory system, the lungs are the home base for the red blood cells, the postal workers that carry the oxygen and the CO2. Now, the way that your circulatory system moves the blood around is pretty nifty. Remember when I was talking about air moving from high pressure to low pressure? Well, so does blood. A four-chambered heart, which is just one big honkin' beast of muscle, was set up so that one chamber, the left ventricle, has very high pressure. In fact, the reason it seems like the heart is situated a little bit to the left of center is because the left ventricle is so freaking enormous and muscly. It has to be that way in order to keep the pressure high enough that the oxygenated blood will get out of there. From the left ventricle, the blood moves through the aorta, a giant tube, and then through the arteries and blood vessels that carry the blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. Arteries are muscular and thick-walled to maintain high pressure as the blood travels along. As arteries branch off to go to different places, they form smaller arterioles, and finally, the very little capillary beds, which through their huge surface area facilitate the delivery of oxygen to all of the cells in the body that need it. Now, the capillary beds are also where the blood picks up CO2. So from there, the blood keeps moving down the pressure gradient through a series of veins. These do the opposite of what the arteries did. Instead of splitting off from each other to become smaller and smaller, little ones flow together to make bigger and bigger veins to carry the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. The big difference between most veins and most arteries is that instead of being thick-walled and squeezy, veins have thinner walls and have valves that keep the blood from flowing backwards, which would be bad. This is necessary because the pressure in the circulatory system keeps dropping lower and lower until the blood flows into two major veins. The first is the inferior vena cava, which runs pretty much down the center of the body and handles blood coming from the lower part of your body. And the second is the superior vena cava, which sits on top of the heart and collects the blood from the upper body. Together, they run into the right atrium of the heart, which is the point of the lowest pressure in the circulatory system. So all this deoxygenation oxygenated blood is now back in the heart, and it needs to sop up some more oxygen. So it flows into the right ventricle and then into the pulmonary artery. Now arteries, remember, flow away from the heart, even though in this case it contains the oxygenated blood. And pulmonary means of the lungs, so you know that this is the path to the lungs. After the blood makes its way to the alveoli and picks up some fresh oxygen, it flows to the pulmonary vein. Remember, it's a vein because it's flowing to the heart, even though it contains oxygenated blood. And from there, it enters the heart again, where it flows into the left atrium, and then into the left ventricle, where it does the whole body circuit again and again and again and again. And that is the way that we work. Our hearts are really efficient and awesome, and they have to be because we're endotherms, or warm-blooded, meaning that we maintain a steady internal temperature. Having an endothermic metabolism is really great because you're less vulnerable to fluctuations in external temperature than ectotherms or cold-blooded animals. Also, the enzymes that do all the work in our bodies operate over a very narrow range of temperatures. In humans, that ranges between 36 and 37 degrees Celsius. But the trade-off is that endotherms need to eat constantly to maintain our high metabolisms and also create heat. And for that, we need a lot of oxygen, hence the amazing, efficient 4-chambered heart and our gigantic frackin' lungs. Ectotherms, on the other hand, have slow metabolisms and don't need as much in the way of food. A snake is totally pumped if it gets a meal once a month. So since ectotherms aren't doing much in the way of metabolizing, they don't need much in the way of oxygen. So their circulatory systems can be, a little bit janky and inefficient and still cool. Remember back when we were tracking the development of chordates? One of the signs of complexity was the number of chambers in an animal's heart. Fish only have 2 chambers, one ventricle and one atrium. The blood gets oxygenated as it moves through the gills and then carries oxygen through the rest of the body back to the heart where it's moved through the gills again. But reptiles and amphibians have 3-chambered hearts. They've got 2 atria but only 1 ventricle. And what that means is that not all of the blood gets oxygenated every time it makes a full pass around the body. So oxygenated blood gets pumped through the body and mixed up with a little deoxygenated blood. Not super efficient, but again, doesn't really have to be. So there you have it, the how and why behind how oxygen gets to all the places it needs to be. The question is, what powers the diaphragm? What powers the heart? Where does that energy come from? Well, it comes from the digestive system. And that's what we're going to be talking about next time. Thanks for watching this episode of Crash Course Biology. If you want to go review any of the stuff we talked about today, click over there. It's all annotated up for you. Thanks to everyone who helped put this episode together. If you have any questions or ideas or thoughts, please leave those in the comments below or on Facebook or Twitter, and we will do our best. We'll see you next time.
So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the chambers of the heart and how they're going to be really good at generating pressure. Like yesterday, we talked a lot about pressure gradients and concentration gradients, right? Like both of those things are very vital to understand when you understand like why something is moving from one place to another, right? So like when we look at a concentration gradient, again, nature hates that, right? It doesn't like it when there's a lot of stuff over there and very little stuff over there. And so what it does is it moves some of the stuff from here to there until both levels are sort of equal. The same thing is true with the pressure gradient, right? If you increase the pressure over there and there's an area of low pressure over there, all of the stuff is going to move to the area of low pressure until it's equal. This is why, when you open up a balloon, it blows all the air out of it because the balloon is squeezing and there's much more pressure inside the balloon than there is outside of it. And so that causes it to all sort of move away. So, the same thing is going to happen with our blood. We are going to use pressure gradients to deliver blood throughout the body. So, your cardiovascular system is really important. It's going to help you regulate your body temperature by removing excess heat. One of the things your body is paired up to do is sweat. You guys should all be very familiar with that. You start exercising, you're out on a hot day and your body temperature starts to rise. Now, he said it in the video, and I think I said this yesterday, your body's enzymes, they really only survive at a pretty narrow range of temperature, about 97 to 99 degrees. If your body temperature drops below 97, your enzymes start to die. And if it gets above 99, your enzymes start to die. Like they don't live very well. That's part of why your body actually develops a fever when you get sick. It's trying to basically cook out the virus, but unfortunately it takes kind of some of your enzymes along with it. So as we're looking at this, if we're looking at, this very narrow range of temperature, it's really important to make sure that we maintain it. And one of the ways that we're going to maintain that temperature, if we start to get a little bit too hot, your skin's going to start to sweat, and then cool air is going to rush past the sweat that's on your skin. And what's also going to happen is the blood vessels in your skin are going to open up. So the blood vessels in your skin get a little bit wider, and the blood raises closer to the surface of your skin. So it actually gets closer to the surface of your skin. That's why it's sometimes like you can literally feel when you're nice and warm, like in your palms and stuff, because your blood is really close to the surface there. So then that cool air rushes past, and because the blood is so close to the surface, it's going to lower its temperature thanks to that cool air sort of evaporating some of that sweat off of you. And it can carry it around and kind of cool off your body. The exact opposite is true as well. If you're starting to get cold, you ever notice how you get like goosebumps, right? Like your skin gets all those little goosebumps on it. Your blood is going to drop away from your skin. It's actually the blood vessels are going to kind of constrict because it's trying to maintain as much body temperature as possible. This is actually one of the reasons why when you're trying to warm up, if you guys have ever, anybody experienced this, when you're trying to warm up, if you're really cold, sometimes you'll put your hands on like a heater. And what'll happen is like your hands will expand the blood vessels, and they're like, oh, great, there's heat. And so they expand to sort of take in that heat. And then you leave away and you're way colder afterwards than you were the first time, because like all those blood vessels are open, and now all the cold air is carrying that around your body. This is actually one of the reasons why if you ever run into somebody who is suffering, and this is an Oregonian thing, actually, really quickly, pop quiz. What do you do if you suspect someone is hypothermic? What do you do, guys? I have a feeling my military folks are actually going to know the answer to this anyways, but anybody know what to do? Hypothermic. Their body temperature is really low. They're freezing to death.
Well, are you talking about just like in general, or?
Yes. What should you do?
Give them some clothes, dude. No.
Yeah, you try to warm them up, right?
Aren't you supposed to warm up with your body weight?
What's that, Joseph?
Aren't you supposed to use your own body warmth to warm them?
You can, but here's the trick. And this is what they'll tell you. You actually have to be a little careful when you're warming somebody up. Do not just, a lot of times it's like the hands and the fingers and the toes, right? Those are the really cold parts. So you would think you'd want to warm that up first to make somebody feel good. Don't do that. You want to hug them and get their core warm first. If you warm up their arms and then their arms start sending that cold blood back into their center, it can actually stop their heart because so much cold blood starts entering the heart. So when you're warming somebody up, you want to warm them from the center out. That is Oregon Training 101. I learned that when I was in like 4th grade. It's like every year in health class, our teachers would bring it up, and it was like, if you ever get really wet and you ever get really cold, don't warm up your hands first. Anyway, so that's part of your cardiovascular system's job. It's gonna, help you balance out your heat. It's also gonna help you balance out your pH. We humans, we tend to be pretty neutral. We're on the slightly acidic side on the pH scale. We're not perfectly neutral. But if we eat too many acidic foods like, coffee and orange juice and things like that, which acidic foods tend to be a lot of people's favorites. Soda is very acidic. That kind of stuff raises your pH. And so you can flush that out and kind of balance it out with water, and your cardiovascular system is going to help you pump that water around. And then obviously it's going to distribute, the thing we're really spending most of our time talking about today, it's going to distribute nutrients and oxygen and things like that throughout the body so that your body can produce energy. Oh, shoot. The cardiovascular system, when we're talking about that, just to give you the sort of definition here, it is comprised of your heart, it's your blood, and it is all of your blood vessels, right? So the heart is the big one that we always think of, but don't forget, we have to have something to pump around by the heart. That's your blood. So that's part of the cardiovascular system. And then we have to have a series of tubes throughout our body that allow us to do that, right? So we have to get it from point A to point B. And so your heart is this sort of like closed circuit of tubes. In fact, you'll hear that term sometimes when you're studying biology. They call our vascular system, our blood vessels, they call it a closed circuit. I don't want to ruin Spider-Man for anyone, but I'm going to. So, you know, Spider-Man's like swinging around the city, right? Like he picks up all that momentum and he hits the bottom and then he swings straight up again, right? And it's like you look at how many like G forces that he's dealing with. A regular human being would pass out at the apex of that arc every single time. Like if you were swinging the way Spider-Man does, a real human being, all of your blood, because it's a closed circuit, would pool in your legs. You'd be sending all your blood to your legs, and then your brain wouldn't get any blood and you'd pass out. That's what you always see when you ever look at like astronauts who are training. They put them in that, you know, spinny tube, circle thing, and they make them, you know, experience a lot of G forces, and eventually they kind of pass out because all their blood is getting pulled away from their brain. Fun fact, an actual spider travels at G forces very similar to Spider-Man. They actually do swing like that, and it doesn't look very fast to us because they're tiny, but they're actually experiencing a very, very similar G force. But spiders can actually survive that swinging because they don't have a closed vascular system the way we do. We have this closed, you know, circuit of tubes. Like, you know, if you imagine like the first tube, I don't know which tube is the first tube, but it would go around and eventually it would connect all the way back to the end. It is a closed circuit. Spiders actually have their heart basically in the dead center of their body, and they have what's called an open vascular system. And whenever their heart beats, it basically just kind of splashes blood everywhere. And then it kind of just gets gathered back. So whenever they're experiencing like really high G forces, they're not really at risk of passing out. So there's the scientific explanation behind why my favorite superhero could probably never actually exist. So that is our cardiovascular system. It's your heart, it's your blood vessels, providing a delivery system of nutrients throughout the body, and it is responsible for generating and maintaining pressure, right? That's really the big thing. So let's go ahead and start by talking about the head honcho here. We're going to talk about the heart. So the heart itself is a muscular blood pumping organ that's responsible for generating and maintaining pressure. That's all your heart cares about. It is just trying to maintain pressure while also generating lots of pressure. So that's why your heart has 4 chambers inside of it, right? Now, here's the thing, guys. I cannot draw an actual heart. It is just impossible for me to do that. I can look us up pictures boy, of the heart, right? And we can see these 4 chambers here, but I do want to kind of do this and show you the sort of how this sort of works here. So I'm going to pull this picture up. Here's the 4 chambers of our heart. And then I'm going to go ahead and take us through heart, but the only way I know how to do this is by drawing a Valentine's heart. Obviously your heart does not actually look like this, but it's kind of helpful because guess what? The chambers they actually can kind of fit in here pretty well, right? You're going to have 2 chambers up top like this, and you're going to have 2 chambers down below. That one I'll have to draw kind of in a funky shape down here like this, right? And then this chamber is really big. And it's got this big, thick, muscular wall over here, right? So this is your heart, right? It kind of looks something like this. It actually looks something like this. It's kind of got a Valentine's shape. There's a little dent right there, but that's about as good as it gets. These are the various chambers of your heart. So there's 4 chambers, right? These top 2 chambers here are known as your atriums, and these bottom 2 chambers here are known as your ventricles. Atriums are responsible for gathering blood, and ventricles are responsible for pumping blood out of the heart. So these both squeeze simultaneously, but they're connected to tubes that go in different directions. The right ventricle is going to pump it over to the lungs so they can go pick up some more oxygen. And the left ventricle, which is arguably the most important part of the heart, is going to squeeze and eject blood throughout your entire body, right? So how does it actually squeeze and do stuff like that? How is it able to squeeze so hard? Well, your heart has a lot of different layers to it of muscle, right? And so we look at that outermost layer. That outermost layer is called the epicardium. So if we look here, see in the picture here, you can see how there's this kind of outer extra layer here that kind of surrounds the heart, right? That's your epicardium. Okay, so the epicardium is the outermost layer of the heart that sort of separates it from all the other tissues. Now, there's actually another layer that I don't think they're going to mention. Yeah, they're not mentioning it in this PowerPoint. There's actually another layer just outside of that. It's not officially part of your heart necessarily, but it's called your pericardium. Peri for perimeter, right? So it surrounds the outside of your heart, and cardium for heart. So it's this little sac that surrounds your heart, and it holds your heart in place. It holds your heart in your chest cavity. And so the pericardium isn't necessarily part of the heart, but it is really important to the heart's function because, well, you don't want your heart to fall into your stomach, you know? And the pericardium is kind of responsible for that. Now, the pericardium is really squishy on the inside. It's really, well, not squishy, it's really slick on the inside, right? And so whenever your heart beats and whenever your heart is, pumping and stuff, we don't want that sac to ever get like tangled up and then keep the heart from being able to expand. So it's very, 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 very slick. But sometimes you can get a disease called pericarditis. This is actually one of the symptoms of the coronavirus that we're all dealing with right now. One of the symptoms is pericarditis. It's where actually there's a bacterial infection and fluid starts to get within the layers of the heart. And so when that happens, that actually, makes it less slick. You would think adding water would make it more slick, but we're talking like a really, viscous material that you are actually making less viscous when you add water to it. And so then like the heart has a really hard time beating. And that's one of the reasons why, again, out of the diseases out there, this is a pretty dangerous one. So that's pericarditis. You'll sometimes hear about that as an infection. Sometimes it happens, it's like a side effect of pneumonia and other diseases and things like that. So there's the pericardium around the outside. The epicardium is the outermost layer of the heart itself. And then here's the innermost layer, right? Look at the inside walls of these chambers here. That is a really smooth inner layer, right? Also very slick, but much more importantly, just very, 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 very smooth. And this inner layer is what's known as the endocardium. Endo means innermost, right? Like he said in the video, he was talking about how like snakes and stuff, they're ectotherms. They heat themselves up, and lizards and stuff, by sunning on rocks, and they take heat in outside of them, right? Well, endotherms, we generate our own internal heat, which is why we're a little bit better at dealing with certain temperatures. So the endocardium means innermost. It's coming from within, right? So that's the inner layers of the heart right here. And this has to be really smooth. We need this to be smooth because red blood cells, which are those little, little donuts, they've got a really cool ability, which is that they can clot. And that's awesome. We love the fact that our blood cells can clot, because if you open up your skin, you don't want to keep losing red blood cells consistently. You want to stop that freaking thing, and then it creates a little plug of like a little scab, and that keeps blood from leaking out. So awesome. Thank you, clotting. But we do not want any of the cells to get stuck inside the chambers of the heart here. None of those red blood cells. And there's too much texture. If it's not smooth, red blood cells can get stuck, and then another red blood cell can get stuck to that. And that is where it gets dangerous. When red blood cells start clumping up together and they don't really move around too much, they think, oh, clearly there's been a cut. We should start clotting. And so they start to clot together if they ever like get stuck in one position. This is also one of the reasons why high cholesterol is so dangerous and one of the leading causes of death in the US, right? When you fill your blood vessels with cholesterol, you end up seeing plaque. We call it plaque. Plaque is where you can see cholesterol is actually building up in the vessel of the blood. That's limiting blood flow. And then what ends up happening is blood cells all lump up and then they start to clot, and that forms a really dangerous clot. And that also stops blood from being delivered where it needs to go. And then that clot can travel throughout the body. If it ever does squeeze through there, and then there's this big chunk running through your blood vessels, it goes into your heart and then gets pumped up, and it might end up in your brain. And these are not very large blood vessels right here. So what ends up happening is it blocks oxygen delivery to your brain, and that's how you have a stroke. So very, very, very dangerous. And that's one of the reasons why we have such smooth inner chambers inside the heart here. And then our final layer. So we have an outer layer, we have an inner layer. The most important layer is this middle layer. Look at how thick this is in the middle here, right? See how thick this wall is compared to the, right? Like this little thin red line here, this little thin white line on the outside, and then this really thick layer in the middle. That is what is known as your myocardium. Whenever you hear the word myo, I want you guys to think muscle, right? You're in muscle country. Well, this is what we call cardiac muscle. And cardiac muscle is really unique compared to your skeletal muscle. It doesn't have as many striations. It doesn't have as many actin and myosin proteins in it. So it's not as strong as skeletal muscle. Like I wouldn't want to pull my heart out and use it to deadlift or anything like that. But it is really good at contracting very consistently. Remember yesterday we talked really briefly about the differences between slow twitch type 1 muscle fibers and fast twitch type 2 muscle fibers. We said that the fast twitch fibers are really strong, but they don't have a lot of endurance. We said the type 1 are a little bit weaker, but they have tons of endurance. Well, your heart muscle is like type 1/2. It's super enduring. Not quite as strong as skeletal muscle, but it can contract, essentially forever. Not actually forever, but like it starts beating since before you were born, and it is going to continue beating until you're done. That's the heart's job. So it never stops. Your heart does not get a break. It is beating 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It never, ever, ever, ever stops. So we need to have a lot of muscle tissue there to allow that to happen. Now, like I said, when we're looking at the chambers, remember how I said ventricles pump blood out of the heart, right? Well, the right ventricle, this blue side here, right? Remember, what does blue mean? It means deoxygenated blood. It's blood that has a lot of carbon dioxide in it, but it's already given up all of its oxygen to whatever tissue it was delivering. So it doesn't have any oxygen. So what does it need to do? It needs to get oxygen, right? So this blue side of the heart, this right ventricle is going to pump it over to the lungs. Our lungs are pretty close to your heart. So that's not a very strong contraction that needs to get made. It's really only going a couple inches. But this left ventricle here, this is red blood. That is oxygenated, rich in oxygen blood that needs to get delivered against gravity to my brain. It needs to get all the way down to my glutes if I'm doing a run. It needs to get all the way down to my right pinky toe, which is about as far away as you're going to get in the body from your freaking heart, right? So this is a very muscular chamber, and that's why your heart kind of tilts to this side, or at least it looks like it's tilting to this side. That's why we put our hand over the left side of our heart during the national anthem and stuff like that too, by the way. It's not here, it's here. But it kind of tilts that way ever so slightly. So I don't know. Whoever's idea was to, when I was like first studying and learning all this stuff, and I was like much more pedantic than I am now, if you can believe that. I definitely I was like, technically the heart is here. I'm gonna hold my hand like this. Blah. Anyway, so that's your left ventricle, right? It's very muscular. Look at how much thicker this is, right? They kind of share this side, but then look at how much thicker this side of the wall is compared to over here. That's got to be able to pump blood over very, very long distances in your body. So those are the various chambers of the heart, and those are the various layers of the heart. So you've got the epicardium around the outside. the myocardium, there's the thick muscular layer in the middle, and the endocardium, which is the most inside. And then we're not talking about it today, but you've also got your pericardium, which is a little sac that covers the whole thing.
Hey, Brad,
What's up?
so that picture of that heart?
Yep.
That's from the perspective of the heart, right? Not like a person looking at it.
Yes. Yeah, you guys might be looking at this and being like, why is the right on the left and the left on the right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's-
here's a fun little history lesson for you, Mir. 18-year-old me taking his first biology class back in the day must have not been paying attention or missed class or went to the bathroom or something happened and I missed the explanation, and I literally thought my textbook was just labeled wrong. And it was like 2 weeks into that class before I realized that it's from the anatomic position, and so it's from the perspective of the heart, and my brain was like, oh.
Yeah, it's not from the perspective of the.
What's that?
It's not from the perspective of the person.
It is from the perspective of the person, right? So like,
Not somebody looking at it though.
right side, left side. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is, let's say this is Bob's heart. This is Bob's right and Bob's left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And that screwed me up when I was in school.
Yeah, dude, bro. I was,
It's a simple explanation. If one person had taken 10 seconds like I just did, it would have been fine. But I missed it, and I was so confused for the first couple weeks. I remember being so stressed out and being like, "This may not be for me."
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, like I said, your heart is going to be continually pumping blood out of it, right? That's really its entire job. And so the volume of blood at the end of each relaxation of your heart is about 130 milliliters. So your heart can hold about 130 milliliters of blood. Now, your heart's not perfect when it comes to squeezing blood out. It actually keeps a little bit of blood in the heart, which again allows it to maintain pressure, right? Like imagine, if you had, again, like kind of a water bottle with the lid off of it, right? And you were trying to we're having a contest of who can squeeze that water, and eject it the farthest. We'd need to refill the water back into the bottles between each round, because if there's not enough water in there and you squeeze really hard, it's not really going anywhere, because the more water there is in there, the higher pressure there is to start. And then when you squeeze, it'll have even more pressure. That's how your heart works. So when your heart contracts, there's still about half of the blood left in the heart. And so that's actually how you're sort of contracting things. And that's part of, again, the heart's very, very, very important job is to generate and maintain pressure. Now, your heart rate is going to be controlled and sped up, and it's going to slow down thanks to, interacting with your nervous system, which we'll take a look at here in just a little bit. So here is the chambers of your heart, right? Again, they don't really do the colors thing in this version, that's why I pulled the other version. So I'm actually going to go back to that. So you got the right atrium here, the left atrium here, the right ventricle over here, and the left ventricle over here. So hold on just a second to make sure I'm not skipping forward. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and talk about those chambers here real quick. So like I said, it's got 4 chambers. The right atrium, okay, we'll go ahead and start over there. I know my notes are actually going to go in a different order, but the right atrium, that's where we'll start. This atrium is going to gather deoxygenated blood coming from the body. This is, we'll say this is the right atrium, right? It gathers deoxygenated blood from the rest of the body. Okay, so whenever blood comes back to the heart, it just got done delivering oxygen to your glutes. So what does it have? It has a lot of CO2 in it. It doesn't have very much oxygen in it, right? Oh, God dang it. So that's the right atrium. Okay. So the right atrium is going to pump blood out of the heart, headed towards the lungs to get new oxygen. Okay, so that's what this chamber is going to do. It's going to pump blood out of the heart, and it's going to try to get it to the lungs so that we can get some more oxygen in there, right? And actually, you know what? I shouldn't even necessarily say it that way. Hold on. Let's relabel that. This is going to gather the blood that will, in a second, get pumped to. There we go. So the reason I had to be distinct there. So here's the thing about the atriums, right? You've got your right atrium here, responsible for, gathering that deoxygenated blood. Over here, you've got your left atrium, okay? This is going to gather oxygenated from the lungs. Okay, so this chamber is gathering the oxygenated blood. Okay, this is the one that's actually getting it after it picked up a bunch of oxygen. That's why we're going to kind of draw that in bright red there. Now, this side here is going to, like I said, gathers blood that will, in a second, get pumped throughout the body. Oof, man, I did not give myself enough space to draw these friggin' charts. So this side is gathering blood that's going to get pumped throughout the rest of the body. I spelled the word gathered wrong. So the left atrium is picking that up there. I forgot my freaking braces. The left side's picking that up there. And it's got a bunch of oxygen, so it needs to get pumped out to the rest of the body. So that's what both of the atriums do, right? The atriums are gathering blood. And that's kind of what atrium means. Like, guys, if I Google the word atrium like that, you know what we're going to see? We're actually not going to see a bunch of pictures of the heart. We're going to see a bunch of pictures of hotels and, stuff like that. It's a gathering site. It's where you go in and you wait until somebody comes downstairs and says, all right, you're going up to room 212, like it's a gathering area. That's what an atrium is. It's a big empty chamber that gathers people. Well, in this case, it's a big empty chamber that gathers blood. So it gathers it here in the right atrium and the left atrium so that pressure can build up. Because guess what? See these little valves right here? Now they're open right now. You can see the valves are actually open. I think in the PowerPoint they were closed. No, they're still open. But basically these valves normally are closed shut when blood is coming into the heart. And what that does is it fills this chamber because the valve is closed, right? Now, what happens when a chamber gets filled? Just like a balloon, right? You fill up the chamber, pressure increases, right? And there's more and more and more pressure until eventually that valve, opens up, it slams open. And when that happens, blood goes rushing from this area here down here. Why does it run down here? Well, this chamber is now empty because the heart just got done beating and pumping all the blood out of it. So again, an area of high pressure, which are our atriums currently, are going to empty into an area of low pressure, which are our ventricles. Now, the ventricles are going to further create a whole bunch of pressure because that's really where the big muscular contraction part takes place. So our left ventricle, we'll start with the right ventricle. Our right ventricle, right, is going to pump deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Okay, so this is that deoxygenated blood. It's got to pump it over to the lungs. I actually can't get this to fit. That's so annoying. So that's this one right here, right? It's going to pump any of the blood that it receives from the right atrium, right? So it receives blood from the right atrium. Okay, and then what it's about to do is it's about to generate enough pressure to pump it over to the lungs, right? Meanwhile, the left ventricle, and this is the key to kind of memorizing the heart, actually. The left ventricle is going to pump oxygenated blood to the rest of the body, okay? So that side is pumping oxygenated blood throughout the rest of the body, and this side is obviously receiving blood from the left atrium. So that is basically the key to the 4 chambers of the heart, right? You can see it's going to go. So let's go ahead and track a brand new red blood cell. Okay, let's say there's a brand new red blood cell on the factory floor, and it's going to get pumped into the blood vessels for the very first time, so it can start doing its job, right? So a brand new blood vessel, it's never picked up oxygen before, it's never picked up carbon dioxide before, it's brand spanking new. What does it need to do first? It needs to make its way to the lungs so that it can get some new oxygen, or not new oxygen, it can get oxygen for the first time, right? So what's going to happen is it's going to travel up to the heart, and it's going to flow into this right atrium right here. So it's going to get gathered up with a whole bunch of other red blood cells, and it's like, hey, how you doing? So, oh, you're the new guy. All right, welcome, welcome. You know, and it's going to get all gathered up. And then it's going to drop into the right ventricle, and that's when the heart's going to squeeze. And when that happens, that ejects that red blood cell out of the heart. It's either going to go to the left or go to the right, and it's going to go over to the lungs. And for the very first time, that red blood cell is going to gather a whole bunch of oxygen molecules on it, because it's got its iron, it's got its hemoglobin, and it attracts all that oxygen. And then the heart's going to suck it back into the left atrium. And now that red blood cell is bright, bright red because it's got a whole bunch of oxygen attached to it. It'll gather here, you know, with all of its friends again and be like, all right, are you ready? You're going to go on your first journey. It's like, oh, yeah, yeah. And then it's going to drop down into the left ventricle. The heart's going to squeeze again. And this time it's going to get ejected out of the heart, up through this vessel here that kind of loops around and drops down, drop behind the heart. And let's say this time it's going to go down to your calf muscles because you're in the middle of a run, right? So it goes down and it's got all this oxygen. It's like, hey, calf muscle, here, have all of my oxygen. And the calf muscle is going to go, great, I need that to produce a lot of energy. Here, have all my carbon dioxide. So now that brand new red blood cell is going to pick up CO2 for the first time ever. And now it's a deoxygenated, dark red, but blue, red blood cell. And it's going to travel its way back to the heart so that it can go get oxygen. So again, it goes into the right atrium, into the right ventricle, it goes back to the lungs, drops off its CO2, picks up more oxygen, back to the left atrium, back to the left ventricle. And let's say this time it goes up to your brain. And, you know, eventually that red blood cell is going to make a whole bunch of laps around the body and deliver oxygen throughout your various tissues. So we're going to look at the left atrium and the right atrium here. The left atrium is going to gather oxygenated blood, right? Left atrium, red. The right atrium is going to gather deoxygenated blood. The left ventricle is going to push oxygenated blood. If it's oxygenated, we need to get it to the body tissues. The right ventricle is going to pump deoxygenated blood. If it's deoxygenated, it needs to get to the lungs, right? So those are the various chambers of your heart. Now, that can be a little confusing to try to memorize sometimes. Here's the trick, guys. Learn this one right here. Everybody memorize the left ventricle. And it's pretty easy to memorize because guess what? Every time you've ever taken your pulse, right? You know what you're feeling? You are feeling that left ventricle squeeze. You're actually feeling a whole bunch of blood get ejected from the heart. And so it runs past, and that's how you're like feeling that beat, right? That is the left ventricle in action. And arguably the left ventricle is the most important part of, I mean, here's the, they're all really important, but the left ventricle is the one responsible for pumping blood throughout the rest of the body. And if you can remember that, you can figure out the rest of your chambers. What's the opposite of left? Right. Okay, so if the left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood, what's the opposite of that? The right ventricle must pump deoxygenated blood. And then if the ventricles are pumping, the atriums are gathering. So you can literally kind of figure it out if you just memorize this first one. Memorize that left ventricle. The left ventricle is the one that you're feeling when you feel your pulse, and it's responsible for pumping blood throughout the body. That's how we deliver our oxygen. That's what the heart's known for. It's known for all the work that the left ventricle does. So those are the various chambers of the heart. Like I said, you do have several layers here. You've got the epicardium on the outside, the myocardium in the middle, which is muscular enough to make the pumping happen, and the endocardium in the innermost layer. And that's going to make sure that blood never gets stuck. All right. Any questions or comments or concerns? How y'all feeling so far? Anybody need a little bit more elaboration on any of that?
No, I'm pretty good. I'm just taking the notes over here. So pretty much the atriums, right? The left and the right ones, they both have to do with deoxygenated blood, right? And they
No. So the right atrium is deoxygenated. The left atrium is oxygen. It has oxygen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I messed up. I fixed that.
So it's not deoxygen up top and oxygen down below. It's deoxygen on the right, oxygen on the left.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
That makes more sense.
And then we'll look at the heart signal here in just a second. Hold on.
So the left side has to do with the oxygen, right? Because the left ventricle also deals with the oxygenated blood.
Yes, the left side is the one that's gathering oxygenated. It has to gather it first so that it can get it into the chamber that'll pump it. So it gathers the rich in oxygen blood, drops it off to the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle, sends it to wherever it's going, ships it out to the glute muscles and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I guess here's one with arrows, so you can kind of see how all that works, right? So blood comes in from here and here. That's the right atrium. Then it moves into the right ventricle, pumped up, goes over to the lungs, gets sucked back in to the left, down to the left, pumps out to wherever it's going. So blood's going to go from heart to lungs to heart to body to heart to lungs to heart to body. It's like you said in the video, it's a figure eight. So, all right. So obviously, we need to be able to connect all of, the blood has to be able to travel somewhere. And that's where your cardiovascular system's vascular system really comes in, right? That is where your arteries, your capillaries, and your veins come in, right? And we'll see those. Hold on one second. This is going in such a weird order. I swear somebody moved my freaking PowerPoint slides. That's so weird why it goes in this order. All right, I got to skip down the notes here for just a second. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to skip through the PowerPoint. We'll come back to that in just a sec. So that's being very weird. So really quickly, let's talk about how the heart is actually generating the signal necessary to squeeze, okay? So take a look here, guys. Look inside, look at this picture here. You can see these little yellow wires that are running throughout your heart. And that's kind of what they are. They're neurons, but we can kind of consider them, they act kind of like little wires. So you see this picture. This is what's known as your heart's conduction system. Okay, this is where your heart is conducting and generating an electric charge. Now, you guys know what happens when electricity hits a muscle. It causes that muscle to contract, right? Like anytime you run electricity through a muscle cell, that muscle cell is going to contract, right? So there's all these little wires that are running through our heart. The first one you can see here, and this is the most important one. This is what's known as your Cyanoatrial Node. It's the We call it the pacemaker of the heart. This right here is directly connected to your nervous system. And this little node here is the one that is responsible for generating the heart signal and telling your heart what rhythm to contract at. So that's why it's called the pacemaker, right? You can kind of think of it as like the conductor in an orchestra. The SA node is telling everyone when to contract the heart, okay? And it lives in your right atrium. It lives in the right atrium right here, right? This is where you're gonna find your SA or cyanoatrial node. Is in this right atrium chamber right there. Now, the reason that's so important and the reason we need to have that connected is because obviously your heart needs to beat at a specific rhythm based on the amount of effort that you are sort of exhibiting, right? So the harder you work, the more you like do stuff, right? Like let's say you're going for a walk and then all of a sudden you start to go walk up a hill. Well, it takes more effort to walk up a hill. It's harder, it takes more muscle. And so that muscle needs oxygen. And that means that you need to pump your heart a little bit faster to deliver more oxygen and more blood, right? So then your heart rate picks up, your breathing rate picks up, right? And all of that is under the control of your SA node. So the SA node is going to get a signal from the nervous system, and it's going to pick up on some of the chemistry of your blood and say, all right, we need to beat a little bit faster. Question, Mayor?
Yeah, that node is in the right side, right?
Yep, right chamber. Yep, right atrium.
Okay.
So the SA node, I think I got that in our notes here. The SA node is the pacemaker of the heart. It responds to chemicals throughout the body, particularly adrenaline. So like when your body starts experiencing stress, it will start producing adrenaline, and adrenaline then runs through the heart, and the SA node goes, oh gosh, we must be exercising. Pick up the pace, right? And that speeds up the SA node and therefore speeds up the heart. And yes, that lives in the right atrium. So then see this wire right here that runs down and, you know, runs around this little loop here. By the way, the reason it runs down like that is because it's zapping everything along the way. And it runs over here to this little node. Now this node here, that is your AV node. And the AV node is known as your Atrioventricular node. It's a little bit less important than the SA node. Like if you guys are going to memorize one thing when it comes to heart, memorize that SA node we just talked about, right? Cyanoatrial node. That's the pacemaker that sets your heart's rhythm. That's the really important one. But the AV node is also really important because guess what it does? It delays the heart's signal. It actually slows the signal down. So when that electricity runs through these little wires right here and it hits this little bundle, that bundle delays the electric impulse. It kind of sits there for a second before it travels out to the rest of the heart. Now that might be kind of weird. You're like, well, why the heck, if it's so important to make the signal, why are we delaying the signal? It's so weird, right? Well, here's the thing about the AV node and why we need to do that. So the AV node, the atrioventricular node, is a node responsible for delaying the signal from the SA node. And it does that so that the different fibers of the heart can contract at different times. Notice how this little wire right here, guys, do you see this? It runs all by itself across the top of the heart from the right atrium and through the left atrium. So the SA node, which starts the signal, runs across the top of the heart first, and then it travels down, but it hits the AV node and gets delayed for a second, and then continues traveling down the heart. So we can actually look this up here. You can see a lot of people have drawn little GIFs of what this looks like. Heart conduction system. So see the way that this electric, no, I hate it when they do that. See the way this works? It runs across the top and then see how it sits here for a second? It goes zoop, and then zoop, right? It does the top and then the bottom, top and then bottom. And then look at this. You can see the top of the heart contracts first. And by time the top of the heart is relaxing, the bottom of the heart is contracting. So your heart actually squeezes. We oftentimes think of your heart beating like this, right? It's like bump, 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 bump. What it actually does is it goes like this, bump, 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 bump. And notice it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, bump, 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 bump. That's kind of what your heartbeat actually looks like. The reason is because when I squeeze the top, what happens? That's an area of high pressure. And down here, this is open. That's an area of low pressure. So then blood goes rushing into the area of low pressure. It loads all the blood into the ventricle. Then this starts to relax and the valves close. And then the heart squeezes. Now you might think that that sends blood back, but the valves are closed. So what does it do? It goes out of the heart. And so then this squeezes and it ejects blood throughout the body or over to the lungs, right? So bum, 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 right? And you can kind of see that there. Squeezes from the top, squeezes from the bottom. That's why the SA node here sends the signal across the top of the heart first. The AV node delays the signal before it travels out to the rest. And then you can see all these other little fibers that are running through the very muscular parts of your heart. Those are called your Purkinje fibers or your Purkinje system. And they're just the various fibers that are running throughout the rest of the heart to allow that to contract. So blood fills in the chambers here, then it fills in the chambers here, and then it ejects out of the heart, going to either the lungs or throughout the body. So that's your heart's conduction system in a nutshell, right? So the SA node starts the signal and causes the atriums to contract and push blood into the ventricles. And then the AV node, which has delayed the signal, once those chambers are done contracting and they start to relax, these valves are going to close. And then the bottom part, the AV, will let the signal go, and then it will run across the rest of the heart and allow that contraction to take place so it can pump blood to, again, either over to the lungs or throughout the body, depending on where it's going. And then there's a little bundle here. I didn't put this in your notes, but there's a little bundle like right here of the Purkinje fibers, which is known as your bundle of His, which is also a really great name for a band. Like, again, if I ever start a metal band, like a heavy metal band, it's going to be called the Red Blood Cell Graveyard, and then my band members will be known as the bundle of His. So that's my retirement plan. All right, let's go back here and take a look at those blood vessels. Anybody have any questions? How's everybody doing on the chambers of the heart? Everybody feeling okay on all that?
Feeling good. I think that GIF was.
Can I say something?
Oh, what's that, Simon?
It's going good. I think that GIF was really helpful. The one where.
Love that. Okay, good. And then Alexia, what was your question?
I said I wish I had it when I was taking medical assisting. You explained. No, being honest, you explained much better of how the heart works.
Appreciate that.
They don't mean anything like how you go like in detail.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. So let's take a look at the blood vessels, guys. This is what's honestly, I think this is kind of one of the coolest parts of the cardiovascular system, other than blood. Blood is fascinating. But we actually don't get to talk too much about blood as trainers, just because it's like, you got hemoglobin, and then we move on. You know, that's like kind of our whole conversation. But blood vessels are really important for us to understand, because like high blood pressure, one of the biggest killers of people on this freaking, well, in our country at least, high blood pressure, cholesterol, all that stuff is so bad for us, right? So let's talk about these vessels. So in your blood vessels, you have a lot, it's a big system, right? Here's what's so cool, guys. Get this. If you were to pull all of your blood vessels out of your body and you laid them out end to end to end, it would be about, in your body, about 60 1,000 miles of blood vessels because they get so thin and so microscopic, they are covering your body. You could circle the earth twice with your blood vessels. That's crazy, right? You can use that fun fact at a party, you know. Someone's like, why are we talking about blood? But that's how many there are. They're crazy. If you guys ever get a chance, go check out the bodies exhibit. They have these really cool things in the bodies exhibit. One of the coolest things they've got are where they have by the way, there's the inside of what your lungs look like, all the individual little ones. You can't see the microscopic ones. There's where it's colored to kind of see the different sections there. But look at how many blood vessels are absolutely just covering your body. And here's the thing, they can't use all of them. They can't like plasticize, I think that's what they call it, most of these. Like when you see these empty gaps, there's no empty gaps. They're just microscopic. So it's too small for us to be able to kind of work with. So you can see like there are so many blood vessels that kind of run throughout our body. There's your nervous system, by the way. So like really amazing. If you guys ever get a chance to go to the bodies exhibit, I cannot recommend it enough. It is super fascinating. But your blood vessels are, like I said, 60,000 miles of arteries, veins, arterioles, venules, and capillaries. Those are sort of the 5 key categories of blood vessels we got. So their job is to deliver oxygen throughout the body and to remove CO2. It's to allow our blood to have somewhere to travel, right? So the first one we'll talk about arteries first, okay? So here's the thing, guys. Do not pay attention to the color of the arteries or the veins. The color is not important. Now, here's the thing. Throughout most of your body, a lot of people fall for this. It's a trap. A lot of people are like, oh, your veins are blue and your arteries are red. It's a really kind of simple way to think about it. And it's accurate 90% of the time. But that's not how I want you guys to think of arteries and veins. Arteries, this is what is true, always carry blood away from the heart. That's the definition I want you to pay attention to. Don't think arteries are pumping oxygenated blood. That's 90% accurate, but it's not 100% accurate because arteries go away from the heart. So when we think about going away from the heart, we think about, oh, it's I need to deliver oxygen to my brain. So we see this artery here, right? Travels up to the brain, right? We see this artery here going out to the arms. We see this artery going down here to the legs, right? Yeah, we see a lot of red arteries that are delivering oxygenated blood. But here, the ones that go to your lungs, that is blood leaving the heart going to your lungs. It's going to the lungs because it doesn't have any oxygen. So don't pay attention to the color. Pay attention to the direction. That's what's important, okay? Arteries always, always, always travel away from the heart, okay? They're the largest blood vessels you have. They're very muscular because, you know, think about like it's coming right out of the heart, right? Like the heart just squeezed, right? So because of that, there's a lot of pressure. They need to be thick. They need to be muscular. Whereas veins actually are very thin and they're much easier because they need to, you know, get sucked back into the heart. But because there's way, way, way more pressure in arteries, they need to be thicker walled. So when we look at the difference between, we look at like the size of our blood vessels here, you can see, look at how much thicker arteries are, right? They're really, and then look at this freaking thing. That's your aorta. That's the sort of first artery coming out of your heart. This little loop that kind of drops up in behind the heart. But arteries are thick, right? They're big. And then veins, much thinner, right? Much, much, much thinner there. Or at least much smaller as well. So arteries are much, much, much bigger because they got to deal with that. And they are, again, the largest blood vessels. They're carrying blood away from the heart. That's what I want you to remember. Veins, they're the opposite. Where do veins go? Veins go towards the heart. And again, we start to see, oh, that's mostly deoxygenated because it's coming from the legs, it's coming from the arms, it's coming from the brain, right? It's going back to the heart, so it's deoxygenated, right? Yes, but what if there's a vein going towards the heart that just left the lungs? Well, now it's a red vein. So again, colors will get you in trouble. There's a mistake that I made when I was in school. Again, I sucked at the heart when I was in school. I really was bad at it. So I'm trying to make sure you guys don't fall into the traps that I did. I don't think I was paying attention the day I learned heart stuff. Veins are going back towards the heart. They're blood vessels that are carrying blood towards the heart. So arteries go away, veins go towards. Now, your arteries are going to branch small. Like, look at how big your aorta is. I mean, if we look at, we go back to this picture of the heart. See this tube right here? That's your aorta. It's this really thick muscular tube. It's the very first artery you've got that kind of branches into 3 sections that are going to go up to your brain, loops around and drops. You can't really, they didn't draw it down here, but it drops behind the heart here and then branches out to your intestines, your stomach, your digestive system. It goes out to your arms, it goes out to your legs, it goes everywhere, right? So that is where it is. But you'll notice that it starts branching. Look, it gets, these branches are smaller, those branches are smaller, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So when an artery starts branching off and gets relatively small, we don't call it an artery anymore, we call it an arteriole, right? Those are small branches from your arteries. So you might remember the same thing from yesterday, right? We had our big primary bronchi. Those were the big tubes, right? You had your trachea and it split into your 2 bronchi, and then the bronchi split smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually we called them bronchioles. Well, arteries split smaller and smaller, and we call them arterioles. Okay, and eventually your arterioles will get so small, they'll become meta-arterioles, which are really tiny ones. And then eventually and by the way, you never hear people say meta-arterioles. Nobody ever uses that term. But eventually they become capillaries, okay? And capillaries are really small. They're microscopic blood vessels, and they form these little beds that cover your tissues. So remember yesterday, we looked at like our capillaries. They were covering our alveoli, right? They form this like little bed, right? And there's the little, that's a little bronchiole, and then it ends in a little popcorn alveoli there, and it's covered, right? These like, I would say that this is like a venule, and this big one here would be called an arteriole. But then all these little ones that are absolutely covering things, that's your capillary bed, right? And so capillary beds are the actual exchange site for oxygen. That is where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanging between the tissues and your red blood cells. So in this spot here, in the bronchiole, or I'm sorry, in the alveoli, that is where oxygen is coming into the red blood cells and CO2 is leaving the red blood cells. And then we will see it cover our body's tissues, right? We'll see our capillary bed cover our tissues like this. It'll go, let's say this is like some brain tissue, right? Well, again, an arteriole will branch smaller and smaller and smaller, and a venule will branch larger and larger and come together. But it'll form this like big capillary bed that covers the tissue. And that's how the tissue is then going to take that oxygen in and give away its CO2. And the red blood cell will work its way from here. And once it's done, it turns blue. And then it goes into here and gets sucked back into the heart. So arteries are the largest blood vessels. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. And by the way, here's a fun fact. Capillaries are sometimes smaller in diameter than your red blood cells. We talked about this yesterday. But sometimes the tube that the blood cell travels through is smaller than the little blood cell itself. And the reason for that is because as it starts to squeeze and it doesn't really fit through the hole, the blood vessel eventually folds in half and it goes, and it gets, and it goes flying out of there. Like it's kind of like a cork coming out of a bottle of champagne. It's like, And that blood cell actually picks up a little bit of extra pressure, which is really good because we want it to keep traveling, right? We don't want it to get stagnant. We don't want there to be so little pressure that it doesn't have any reason to move. So that's actually one of the ways that you maintain blood pressure as well, is by making sure that these little capillaries are super, super, super small. So capillaries are microscopic blood vessels that form these beds that are allowing, oxygen and glucose and amino acids and vitamins and minerals and fatty acids, all of those materials to kind of exchange with the various tissues of our body, whether they're alveoli or, muscles or neurons or glands, whatever you need. So then the capillaries will start to come together. They'll actually kind of like, before, they were branching out smaller and smaller. Well, now they're starting to come together and branch large, like this one and this one. They come together and now it's a little bigger. And then that one comes with this one. It gets a little bigger. It comes together until eventually the small versions are called venules, smaller versions of veins. They start to come together and then they form up your full-sized vein. Right. So again, we go back to our little size chart here, and you can see a capillary, a little bit much smaller than a venule, and then a venule will come together to make up a full vein. And eventually that will travel all the way back to the heart and deliver all of those materials. Right. So one cool thing about veins, by the way, you got to think about, like, again, you got to think about the pressure here. Right. When your heart first squeezes, tons of pressure. Like, that's why your aorta is so big, right? And so, lots of pressure, right? And then the pressure is going to decrease as it goes, right? Again, think about like squeezing a bottle of water. It goes flying out, it kind of loses speed and eventually falls down because it's losing its momentum. It's losing its pressure, right? So the aorta gets a little bit smaller and becomes an artery, gets a little bit smaller, becomes an arterial, gets a little bit smaller and becomes a capillary. Venules and veins are a little bit bigger, but by this point, the pressure is really low. There's really not a lot of pressure left. So what allows blood to kind of keep traveling back to our heart? Well, your veins have these little specialized structures inside of them that arteries don't have in their little valves. And the way they work, if you look here, you can see they're these little, like, just valves that kind of sit like this. And so when blood pushes up the vein, it opens up the valves, and then they just kind of passively fall back into place. So they get pushed out, they kind of fall. So every time your heart goes and sucks some blood back towards it, the valves open up, but then they kind of close back down. And that means that blood kind of travels up and then it falls, but it hits the valve and it can't fall all the way back. And then it travels up and then it comes back and hits the valve. Let's see what, now, how do you get those valves to actually contract? Sometimes it's the heart squeezing, or I'm sorry, it's the heart sucking blood back, right? It's like, and that's pulling the blood back towards, but also your valves are specially situated. Some of your veins are actually situated between muscles. So, you've got two sides to your muscles, right? If you look at two sides to your calf, not your muscle, all your muscles, two sides to your calf muscles, right? Take a look here. You've got the left side of your that's their right foot. You got the left side of the gastrocnemius here, and then you got the right side of the gastrocnemius here. And so those two fibers, when they contract, they actually squeeze, and it squeezes the blood back, right? So it actually gets a lot of help from contracting of muscles. That actually helps your veins send blood back to your heart. And then you can see the little valves, right? The valves are closed when the muscles relax, and that prevents backflow. And then the muscles squeeze, and that opens up the valves, and blood travels up, right? Now, Chris, I'm going to refer to you. What happens, because you've probably seen this in person before, what happens when you don't squeeze your calf muscles and you just let them relax while you are standing? Uh-oh, Chris, you with me?
Using the bathroom book.
Okay. So guys, what do you think happens if you forget to squeeze your muscles so that veins don't actually send blood back all the way to your heart? Well, this is going to start happening. If you lock your knees while you're trying to stand in one spot, what's probably going to happen
Pass out.
is you're gonna pass out. So
Motion last.
this poor news reporter is on some skis here, and she's locking her knees while she's trying to give an interview. And let's
Saturday, her live report, which followed a few minutes later, was destined to become internet lore.
You guys are teaching me how to cross-country ski, so give us some bass.
Brooke is fine, and the video was posted to YouTube, where it has been seen close to 5 million times and has generated thousands of comments.
There are
prompting
so
many
many
to
examples of
speculate
people doing
she
this.
passed out due to locked knees. Did she? It's a good question.
Oops.
YouTube is certainly full of plenty of video evidence that keeping your legs perfectly straight can result in the need for a quick and sudden nap.
The reason, not at a wedding. So the reason this is happening, right? So when you lock your knees, you have no reason to contract. Whoops. You have no reason to contract your calf muscles. So what ends up happening is the vessels just kind of stay open, and all of a sudden your brain is like, excuse me, we need some blood up here. It needs to get back to your heart. So what your body is kind of naturally designed to do when it doesn't get enough blood is it's naturally designed to lay you this way, because blood can travel this way a lot easier than it can travel this way because of gravity. That's also why some people faint at the sight of blood. Like when you see blood, your brain goes, oh no, we must have lost a massive amount of blood. Lay down this way. And it's sort of a defense mechanism that we have. But if you don't squeeze the blood back to your heart by squeezing your muscles, you're in for a bad time. So your veins have these little valves. By the way, those valves can sometimes get stretched out. If you are consistently backflowing blood, what can happen is you can actually stretch out the valves and damage them. And that is how you end up with what is known as a varicose vein. And so you'll see people who have these really big varicose veins. That is usually a sign of a weak heart. And that is, whoo, ouch. So that's usually the sign of like a really weak heart. And so their cardiovascular system is not drawing the blood back up. So it's backflowing and it's stretching out the veins. And eventually those valves, which normally close, they're getting pulled apart. And now blood can leak through this little hole. And they get all stretched out. They can fix that, by the way. A doctor can go in there and just thread in a tube and kind of straighten that out. And they literally just kind of clip off the excess. And they can like and they can fix that. Very, very, very painful. Mir, David, actually, I guess you guys are the only ones. You guys might remember PAD, peripheral arterial disease, right? Very, very, very painful. We got to avoid foam rolling. We got to avoid keeping them on their feet too long if they do have those really intense varicose veins. Okay. So those are your heart. Now, there is also the actual blood in your heart as well, which we got to talk a little bit about, right? And so your blood is going to be, you know, actually delivering everything. Your heart, by the way, itself needs blood. You might think that your heart can just kind of passively extract oxygen from the chamber. I mean, there's all that blood in the chambers. Why can't your heart just kind of get its oxygen from the inside? And it doesn't do that. Remember, we need to cover tissues with blood vessels in order to, we need to cover a tissue with blood vessels in order to deliver that oxygen. So that's where you have what are known as your coronary arteries, right? And so your coronary arteries here are these blood vessels that are covering the outside of the heart. They're actually, you can't see it in the picture here, but they're on a little tube. Like the very first place that blood goes, you know, is up this aorta, but there's a little tube that breaks off from there. and then starts covering the heart itself. And that is what gives your heart all of the oxygen that it needs, just like any other tissue, just like your glutes, your quads, whatever. So it's kind of like your heart understands that, when you're on an airplane and they say like, secure your mask first before helping someone else, right? That's kind of what your heart does. Your heart gives itself blood before any other tissue in the body because it needs, it's the pump responsible for doing all the work. So if it dies, you're in big trouble. Nothing can survive without it delivering everything. So that's why your coronary arteries are so important. And coronary artery disease is the #1 killer of people in the US. More than cancer, more than diabetes, more than anything. Coronavirus, more than that. It kills more people than anything else out there. It is the leading cause of death in the US. And it's literally where cholesterol, plaque, fatty acids start to build up in the heart. And eventually one of these tubes gets blocked. So if we block this tube right here, suddenly the heart can't get any oxygen. And so these cells start to die. And that is what we know as an actual heart attack, or sometimes it's called ischemic heart failure. So this is where we're back to where we started. Like I said, the SA node is going to electrocute, start the signal, and then it'll travel down the heart. So now let's go ahead. Now that we understand our blood vessels, we understand our heart. Let's go ahead and talk about how the heart actually works. Let's move out of the anatomy. Let's move out of the physiology, and let's start talking about like how we're going to make our clients healthier, right? So we need to match the blood flow in our body to the oxygen demand, right? Again, you're walking and then all of a sudden you're walking uphill. You need more oxygen because you need more energy to propel you uphill. Walking uphill is more difficult, right? Or let's say you're walking, you start running, right? Or you start lifting weights. You start doing something that needs more energy than you did before, right? Well, what's going to happen? Or let's say you're sleeping and then you wake up, right? That requires more energy because you're using more tissue. So what's going to happen is your heart is going to go, oh, I need to start beating faster. That's going to happen when you start producing things like adrenaline. And basically the SA node is going like this. It's like, whoo, there's some adrenaline in the blood. I need to beat faster. And that's how it does it. It kind of tastes all of these different chemicals. Or let's say you start exercise, you're lifting weights. What do? You produce lactic acid as a byproduct. So now lactic acid's running through your blood and your heart's like, whoo, that is some acidic blood. And it starts beating faster. So that is how your body sort of matches your blood flow to your oxygen demand. And it's all under the control of what we call your sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system, right? So you get two sides of your autonomic nervous system. You've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic system is the side that tells you to freak out. It's the side that helps you fight off lions and tigers and bears, right? The parasympathetic system is the system that tells you to relax. It's like, hey, relax, we're okay. We can slow the heart rate down. So we need to be able to kind of calculate how our heart actually works. And that's where we start talking about what we call cardiac output. This is probably, guys, if I was saying one thing today that's the most important, I would argue that understanding cardiac output is probably our key concept today. So cardiac output, we sort of understand this by understanding what is called the Fick principle. Fick principle is basically states that your cardiac output will match the oxygen consumption in the body. As you start working harder, your heart will start working harder. I know that was not the most elegant sentence, but that's really what happens, right? As we start to do more work, your heart starts to do more work. So the cyanoatrial node, which is the pacemaker of the heart, will trigger about 70 times per minute at rest. But if you start doing exercise, it will start beating much faster. So this is one of the ways that we understand heart rate. Now, obviously, if your heart is able to pump more blood every time it beats, it doesn't have to beat as often, right? Like imagine like again, like imagine I've got a whole bunch of 5-pound weights over here. Like I've got a stack of 100 5-pound weights, you know, bottom off eBay, whatever. I don't know. Got a whole bunch of 5-pound weights and I need to move them, you know, into my yard, right? I need to, because I'm going to have a yard sale. But I don't know this is a weird example, but let's say I need to move all those 5-pound weights. Now, if I, you know, am not very fit, I might be able to only carry maybe 2 of those 5-pound weights at a time. So I pick up 2 and I travel down, walk downstairs, go out to my yard, drop them down, go back to my room, pick up another 2, go down to the yard, drop them down, go back, pick up another 2, right? So I'm really only carrying about 10 pounds of weight at a time. That's going to take me 50 trips, right? So I got to go fast if I need to get this done quickly, right? Versus, let's say I can carry 3, 4, 5-pound weights in each hand. So 15 pounds every time. Well, now that's not going to take me 50 trips. That's going to take me about 13 trips. I am able to go much more slowly and get more work done because I can carry more. I'm strong enough to carry more. Therefore, I can do it in less time. The same thing is true of your heart. Now, one of the things we know is if someone's heart is beating fast, it means that their heart's probably not very efficient. So let's say, Simon, let's say you and I are going to have a race. It's going to be kind of a weird race. We're actually going to go at the same pace. You and I are both going to get on a treadmill at the same time, and we're going to set that treadmill to 8 miles per hour, and we're going to go for 1 mile. And what the race is it's kind of like golf, this race. It's whose heart rate can be lower at the end of that 1 mile, okay? So you and I are both on the treadmill for exactly the same amount of time, but let's say at the end of that 1 mile, my heart rate is 145 beats per minute. And your heart rate's only 120 beats per minute. What that's going to show me is that your heart is in much better shape than mine, because the amount of times it had to beat to go 1 mile was less than the amount of times mine had to beat to go 1 mile. We both needed about the same oxygen delivery. We needed about the same blood pumped. Mine had to do it in more beats because it was pumping less blood every time the heart contracted. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
That is how we that's the Fick principle, and that's how we understand what we call cardiac output. Cardiac output is the overall performance of the heart, right? It is made up of your heart rate, that's the number of beats per minute, and your stroke volume, the volume of blood ejected from the heart per beat. So we actually have a formula to calculate this, right? Heart rate, number of beats in 1 minute's time, stroke volume, amount of blood. So I can't really measure your stroke volume very efficiently. Like it needs some really fancy equipment to do that. I can't do that in the gym, right? But we know stroke volume is really important. Well, that's okay, because what I can measure in the gym is I can measure your heart rate. And if your heart rate's really high, that tells me your stroke volume must be very, very low. And if your heart rate's really low, that tells me that your stroke volume is high, thanks to this equation right here. Now, everybody needs to have this equation memorized, not because you're ever going to have to do this math, but they love to ask this question. So I want you guys to all recognize this formula so you can get used to it, okay? Cardiac output, which is always listed as Q, by the way. It stands for quotient. I hate that they do that, but Q equals HR, that's your heart rate, times SV, that's your stroke volume, okay? So there are a couple different ways NASM will ask you this question. They will either say, what is the definition of cardiac output? And the definition is the overall performance of the heart, okay? Or they might ask you the volume of blood ejected from the heart per beat is, what is that? That's stroke volume. That's the volume of blood ejected per beat. Or they might say, how often a heart beats in 1 minute is known as, and you need to know that's your heart rate. Or they might say the volume of blood ejected from the heart per minute, that is cardiac output. So when it's just volume, it's the amount of blood, it's just stroke volume. When it's the number of beats, it's just heart rate. When it's the amount of blood per minute, it's cardiac output. Or they might say, how do you calculate cardiac output? And it's heart rate times stroke volume. NASM really loves to ask you this question. They really want you guys to know cardiac output. That's why we talk about it literally every mod. I don't think there's a single mod that I don't walk you guys through this formula, because it's just a very common question. And the reason it's so common is because it's literally our whole understanding of the heart. You know, everything that the reason trainers pay attention, it's like, hey, Alexia, I want you to be at 65% of your heart rate max. The reason I give you a specific number. I don't want you to work too hard. I don't want you to work too easy. Our whole training of the heart is based on this cardiac output principle. So if the stroke volume is high, the heart rate must, if the stroke volume is low, the heart rate has to be high. Therefore, a higher resting heart rate tells us that someone has a less efficient heart. Average heart rate, by the way, when you're resting, about 70 to 80 beats per minute. And we're going to talk a little bit, they talk a little bit about the brain here. Honestly, this is kind of extra. I don't think you need to talk about this, but here's where the cyanoatrial node is working with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. There's the sort of wires and cords that are allowing that to happen. So exercise has a really positive effect. The more you train your heart and the stronger your heart gets, the higher, the better your heart is getting and everything, the lower your resting heart rate is going to be, because it can pump more blood much more efficiently. It can get the same job done in less beats, just like Simon kicking my butt on the treadmill, right? So that is one of the effects of cardiovascular training and why we like it so much, right? So when you're at rest, a large percentage of your cardiac output is actually dedicated to your digestive system. So right now, while you guys are sitting here, for the most part, your heart's just kind of hanging out, you know. A large percentage of your cardiac output is really just going to your digestive system, just letting you process, this morning's breakfast, right? But as you continue to like do more work, and your activity level starts to increase, what starts to happen is the blood vessels going to your digestive tract actually start to constrict, and the blood vessels going to your muscles start to dilate. And that's what allows you, this is one of the reasons why you might notice when you're working out, you don't really have to pee. You don't really have to go to the bathroom all that much. You don't really feel all that hungry until your workout is over. And then it's like, I have to pee, right? It's like the workout, I'm so hungry, right? You're very rarely going to feel hunger in the gym once you start exercising, because your digestive tract kind of shuts down for the most part. Obviously, it's still working, but like very little. And then the muscles are getting all the blood flow. And then what's also cool is depending on what muscles you're working, the blood flow goes there. So if I start doing leg exercises, the blood vessels in my legs open up, and the blood vessels in my digestive tract and upper body kind of constrict. And if I start doing push-ups, well, then the blood vessels in my upper body can dilate, and the blood vessels in my legs constrict. This is one of the reasons why Joseph, Mir, David, Chris, and Gabriel, you guys have heard this before. You do a peripheral heart action circuit, right? We do an upper body exercise, then we do a lower body exercise. We do an upper body exercise, we do a lower body exercise, right? Push-ups into squats, into pull-ups, into lunges, shoulder presses, into deadlifts, right? You go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And what that does is it trains your blood vessels. Your blood vessels actually start to get better at dilating and constricting, which if your client has high blood pressure, great way to exercise. So, speaking of blood pressure, are we going to see blood pressure? Oh my gosh, this PowerPoint is all over the place. Speaking of blood pressure, there are two aspects to blood pressure. You have what is known as systolic blood pressure, or systole, and you have diastolic blood pressure, or diastole. This is the 120/80 that you guys are probably familiar with when it comes to your blood pressure. So your blood pressure is the pressure that's pushing on the walls of your blood vessels while your heart is either contracting or relaxing. Systolic pressure is when the heart is contracting. So when your heart squeezes, obviously there's more pressure pushing on those blood vessels. So typically that's going to be around 120 units of pressure. Okay. And then when your heart relaxes, it relaxes. So there's less pressure. It's not 0, but it's right around like 80 units of pressure. Now that's not true when you start exercising. Your blood pressure spikes like crazy when you're exercising because we need to be able to pump blood. In fact, we looked this up. The highest ever recorded blood pressure was during a deadlift, and it was 370/360. And that was where they took someone's blood pressure while they were doing like a deadlift. They're like, like your pressure gets really high sometimes, but that's not a big deal as long as it goes back to normal while you are at rest. If your blood pressure is really high, like 140/90, while you are at rest, that tells us that you have blood pressure problems and your blood vessels don't contract and dilate the way they are supposed to. So how do we train the heart? Oh,
Brad, I have a question.
Yeah, what you got?
Is that why when you see those videos of those people who are deadlifting extremely heavy and then they pass out right away because their blood pressure got too high from that one deadlift?
Yes. Do you guys want to see one of my favorite fail videos? Yeah,
I saw one yesterday. I was laughing.
This is like this is such an old video, and it's, oh wow, actually I can't find the one I was thinking of. Oh, there it is. So this is one of the reasons why you should not hold your breath. You should hold it for a second while you start to lift and then release it slowly. If you simply hold it the entire time, you might look like this.
Here we go, come on.
And also, do not do that with your low back. Ugh.
Get up. Yeah, there it is. Nice.
Oh no. So yeah, don't do that. Do not hold your breath. That guy's fine, by the way. That guy's actually, he became a YouTuber, weirdly enough. But do not hold your breath while you're exercising. You can create pressure and breathe like this. That's okay. And can be very helpful sometimes for abdominal pressure. But it will increase your blood pressure. And if you already have blood pressure problems, yeah, Joseph, it's gonna knock you out. If your brain ever thinks it's not getting enough blood, it will lay you horizontal. So, because your body goes, oh, lay down, you know. All right, so here's what's cool about training. As we start to exercise, regular exercise is going to have really positive effects on our cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular exercise will actually increase the efficiency of your heart, and it will help you develop more type 1 muscle fibers. Remember, type 1 muscle fibers are endurance fibers. Type 1 fibers have a lot of oxidative enzymes. They primarily rely on producing energy with oxygen. So type 1 muscle fibers are muscle fibers that contain a large quantity of mitochondria and a large quantity of oxidative enzymes. They are much more reliant on oxygen compared with type 2 muscle fibers. If we look at the difference, right? See if I can find the picture I'm looking for here. This is, no, that's not what I want. Oh, we're close, but not quite. Okay, so here's the 2 ways your muscles grow, okay? Here is an example of hypertrophy. This is muscle growth here, right? See how much, there's the same number of proteins in there, but see how big this is? that is full of cellular fluid. And so because there's so much cellular fluid in there, that is really good at glycolysis. It's really good at the sourdough bread version of energy making, right? It does that through fermentation, spits out energy like crazy. Whereas if you look at type, oh, that's good. There we go. Whereas if you look at like a type 1 muscle fiber, right? See how there's more, like there's 3 units of oxygen in this kind of white. Sometimes type 2 muscle fibers are also called like white fibers. So see how there's like 3 oxygen molecules, but over here there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 oxygen molecules. This muscle here, type 1, has more mitochondria. So that type of muscle is able to eat more oxygen than type 2 muscle fibers. So type 1 are metabolically reliant on the mitochondria and on the oxygen. So they have more enzymes, they have more hemoglobin and myoglobin, they have all these things that carry oxygen. So the more you train for cardio, the more your body will make mitochondria to get better at energy production. What that's going to do is that's going to increase your VO2 max. Your VO2 max is the maximal volume of oxygen consumed by the body. Let's say you got 2 people. Both people bring in the same amount of oxygen, but one person exhales more because they didn't use all of it, and the other person exhales way less because their body used all of it. The second person consumed more oxygen, right? So as intensity climbs, the volume of oxygen consumed will climb. And that's where we start talking about what's known as the respiratory exchange ratio. This is the ratio of oxygen consumed versus the amount of oxygen present. So let's say I brought in, 10 units of oxygen and I exhaled about 7 units of CO2. I would be exhaling the remaining 3 oxygen units that I didn't use. So my ratio is 70% or 0.7. And that's what it is when you're at rest. When you're sleeping, your respiratory exchange ratio is about 70%. It's the ratio of oxygen consumed, eaten by your cells, versus the ratio of carbon dioxide exhaled. So if the oxygen coming into the body, and if oxygen comes into the body and 70% of it is consumed, your ratio is 0.7 or 70%, okay? Now, as you start to train your VO2 max, you're still going to be at about 70% when you're resting, but the number of units is going to be higher. So let's say, again, Simon and I are in a race and his heart rate's much lower than mine. That's because I'm sucking air. You know, he's bringing in probably 200 units of oxygen. I might only be bringing in like 140. And so I'm consuming a greater ratio, but the amount of oxygen I'm actually consuming, like, let's say it's 90%. 90% of 100 is less than 80% of 250. You know what I mean? So like he's in much better shape than I am. He has a higher VO2 max. So he's consuming more oxygen. His heart doesn't have to beat that often. It's like, what, we're fine. We got plenty of oxygen. We're good. You know, and that's how VO2 max works, right? So this is one of the reasons why I think it's really valuable to know your VO2 max, guys. Honestly, it's about $100 to get it tested, but do it like twice a year. Just type in VO2 max testing near me. Oh yeah, here's DexaFit. Yeah, these guys are like I think they're like a mobile one. Oh, this one's in Orange County, in Irvine. Whatever. Anyway, you'll go in and the same machine, you can get an RMR test, which is a metabolism test, and you can get a VO2 test. And it'll tell you how good your cardio is, and then train for 6 months and see, is my VO2 max going up or is it going down? You can check in on it by doing the Rockport walk test as well. You know, keep an eye on your VO2 max. It's one of the best ways to tell if you're getting better at cardio or not. So there's a couple of little bits here at the end that NASM's never going to test you on, but just talking about this, one of the things is called preload. Preload is the volume that actually kind of stretches out your heart before it squeezes back. And so, depending on how flexible your heart is, it's important. Just not really, it's not something we really have much of an effect on. I mean, the more you train and the more you draw blood into your heart, the better it will get at that contracting and stuff. There's also the efficiency, right? Like if you're VO2 max, if you're at rest, you're still going to be consuming more oxygen than somebody who is in like less shape. Let's say two people, let's say we're going to use we'll say it's a sci-fi movie, right? And they're going to send two people to Mars, and they're going to put them in like a little, chamber, and they got to account for how much they're going to breathe and stuff. They need to know how much oxygen to send along the trip. Well, honestly, it would actually benefit them. It would be easier to send somebody who's in worse shape because they're not going to consume as much oxygen, right? So as you get more fit, you are going to eat more oxygen and you're going to spit out more energy. This is also why you'll hear people say, people who exercise regularly, right? Why do we exercise, guys? Yeah, I know it's to look good at the beach, but sometimes it's also just feel like you have more energy. Talk to people, it's like, why are you here? Why are you here in the gym? It's like, well, I want to have enough energy to play with my grandkids. And it's like, that person's not looking to do more push-ups. That person's not trying to increase their 1 rep max. They just want to increase their energy production. And the best way to do that is to improve their VO2 max, because as they start to consume more oxygen, what does that result in? Oxygen results in energy. This is why fit, healthy people seem to be like freaking, Energizer bunnies. They got energy all day, and that's where we want to be. This is why exercise is so darn important for all of us. So for the record, there's a lot of different things that are going to limit. There's some big fancy math here, by the way, that you're seeing in the slides. Don't pay too much attention. They're not going to test you on this, but basically, there's a couple things that limit your VO2 max. Having less mitochondria is a big part of it. But what if you have plenty of mitochondria, but you don't have enough hemoglobin? Maybe you're anemic. Right? Well, okay, yeah, you're not going to be able to deliver oxygen, which means your cells aren't going to get any, So you also have to make sure that you have plenty of hemoglobin in your blood, and you need to have more myoglobin. Both of those things, and this is what those numbers actually kind of look like. These are the blood work numbers. Again, don't worry about this. This is way beyond anything that we ever need to look at. But we do know that like exercise is going to increase how strong your heart is, so how well those fibers can contract. It's going to increase how many mitochondria you have in all of your cells throughout your body, and it's going to increase your hemoglobin levels and your myoglobin levels, and you're going to get much better at consuming, but also delivering and extracting oxygen. So, if I'm ever suffocating, honestly, I'd much rather be in a room with somebody who's in worse shape than I am, because we'll be running out of oxygen faster, the better in shape somebody is. That's a pretty morbid example, but I think it drives my point home. All right, that's a weird way to end it. Any questions, comments, or concerns? How's everybody feeling?
Feeling good, feeling well educated, no, I understood everything, I guess. So pretty much your heart just controls your heart rate, right? So that would be like your output to things, right? Or I guess I'm a little bit confused. Could you like summarize that in a sense?
Yeah. So your heart's under the control of your nervous system. Your nervous system goes, oh, heck, we need to deliver more oxygen to the cells, right? So what it says is like, hey, heart, we got to deliver more oxygen. I need you to beat a little harder and a little faster. The heart goes, okay, great. So it picks up the pace, right? And that's under the control of that SA node, which is getting all of its orders from the nervous system. And so then the heart starts picking up pace, right? And if the heart can squeeze a lot of blood, it doesn't have to pick up the pace that much. But if it can only squeeze like a little bit of blood, it has to beat more often. So it's doing the same amount of work, but it's doing it less efficiently. That's somebody who has a lower cardiac output. Right. And so if they have a lower cardiac output, they probably have a much lower VO2 max, because that means that their cells need lots of oxygen because they're unfortunately not consuming it very well. So as their body starts to develop more mitochondria and as their heart starts to get stronger, their VO2 max and their cardiac output are both going to go up. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. So your heart essentially pumps blood to where it's needed, and if your heart depends on how active you are, right? Your VO2 max. So if that's low, your heart can't operate the way that it's supposed to or how it should. If you work out regularly, you're chilling pretty much. So yeah.
Yeah, that's how it works. Joseph, any questions?
I would say we went over this seems familiar. Did we go over this before the break?
Yeah,
A lot of this.
we talked about it in the assessments class. Not in this much detail, but yeah, we talked a little bit about all this.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, wait, why does this all sound so familiar?
Remember, Sochi is a bunch of circles, guys. You're gonna hear. Guess what? In 6 weeks, I'm gonna do this again because we got a new group of students coming in. So we get very circular. The only mod that we kind of leave the heart alone in is the kinesiology mod. That one we spend most of our time talking about like muscles and stuff.
Okay.
Any other questions, guys? All righty, let's kill the recording.